I want to just take your, your thoughts about what's happening with masks and just how authoritarian our country has become. I just heard this story from Charlie Kirk, who apparently he was at a TPUSA event in Phoenix, Arizona. Are you familiar with Charlie Kirk? Sadly,
if I were like Putin, I'd be like, no, I've never heard of him. Just phase them out. But yeah, unfortunately, I have.
Here's let's watch this clip of Charlie Kirk speaking at a TPUSA event. This is a horror show. I had no idea this was going on.
And just a side note on this, I was in California recently, all over. I come home for 24 hours. I try to go into a restaurant, and they say, "Show me your papers." I said, "What are you talking about? Show me your papers." Again, I live in Arizona. So what are you talking about? Show me what kind of papers are you talking about? Pretty naive as on like a phone. Like, what are you talking about? It's kind of weird. They said, "Where's your proof of vaccination?" I said, "What do you mean, like the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination, or like polio, or smallpox?" Like, I could get that. I think actually my pediatrician is not far from here that I grew up with. They're like, "No, the COVID vaccination proof."
It comes back.
His mic cut out?
Yeah. And so, not going to happen. So, and look, they were being nice enough. They were being very compliant Stasi members of the regime, right? They would have been, again, I never want to hear again, like, how could the atrocities of Germany happen? Like, go to Corner Bakery, all right? You'll see. Seriously. Show me your papers. Like, what? Like, I want a panini. Like, this is weird. Show me your papers. And so it really kind of sunk in. And here I am coming back home, being treated like I'm visiting East Germany. Literally, no exaggeration.
No exaggeration.
No exaggeration.
No shot. They said, "Show me your papers."
I think the whole thing is a lie. But which comedian do you think is writing that material? That is a complete
That's the thing, though. I think that's like the thing about all those grifters. They are like failed stand-up comics. It's like you can tell he wants to get laughs and he's trying to be funny, but he's also at the same time making his own point. He's like, measles, mumps, rubella. Exactly. We have vaccines that nobody questioned before you had like social media and like dark money funding dissent. I mean, I don't know. That kid is such a lightweight, such a little joke. And at least he acknowledges that the Holocaust exists. Yeah. I mean, if he's still in touch with his pediatrician, I don't even remember my pediatrician's name. He's like, "There's something on my dick, doctor."
There's no way that story is true at all. Nobody ever, every place you go in New York that you go in and actually sit down and eat, I imagine it's the same in California. I mean, if you just go in and order quickly, you don't.
People do ask to see your vaccine card if you're eating indoors.
If you're eating indoors, if you're just picking up a sandwich, I don't know. Like, if I pick up a slice of pizza, they don't ask me. But if I'm sitting down,
but it's also on your phone. I don't even know why. I mean, we're in a pandemic. I don't know why that's such an infringement. No one said,
"Show me your papers," because nobody's carrying around their vaccine card. Everybody's holding their phone. People say
that was
maybe it was a German. Maybe it was like a German restaurant worker who didn't really have a grasp of English. So he's like, "Show me your papers."
The problem is he goes to Neo-Luddites for his panini, and there they don't use phones. So you actually do need to show documents. They don't recognize any screens there. That's part of the other problem.
Also, I have to show documents when I vote. Is that Nazis too?
Exactly. Well, show me your papers. You mean my ID? You mean like when I drive to register to vote? It is amazing that this is happening in this country. And, we were talking to Burgess about there's a poll out there that Democrats have done too much. They've been too COVID-y during this, and it's supposedly going to hurt them. What is your sense, Jena? I mean, is this country, are we done? Is it Are we done?
It could have been over in 2000. You know what I mean? Like, we should have fought harder for Gore. I don't know. I think, yeah, I mean, democracies die. It's hard to see us turning back from this point. I try not to be doom and gloom. I think about this is so cheesy, but I've been doing comedy for 15 years. And the 15 years I've been in this one little pocket of our culture, I've seen so much positive social change. And I also think as like a woman, even though, you know, we could be slipping into fascism, there's been like no better time or place to be like a woman. I mean, Roe is like in the balance right now. So I could change my tune in June. But, you know, yeah, I think democracies are always a work in progress, and I don't know how we're going to get ourselves out of this one unless we have like a regulated internet and money out of politics and, you know, getting rid of propaganda valves like OAN and Fox. I don't, you know, I think people are going crazy and they're losing their minds, but on an individual basis, I think more people are cooler than they aren't, not to sound like Anne Frank, but...
I mean, that's not bad to sound like that. I mean, that's an optimistic take. I think you're probably right in the end.
Well, talk more about that over the past 15 years, because it certainly within the context of comedy, there's been it seems to have changed dramatically. I mean, both in terms of how political comedians are in our culture. I mean,
do you think comedians are more political or less political?
Much more political than they were 50
Really?
years.
I think of like George Carlin, and I think of Greg Giraldo and Jon Stewart, and like I think almost there was like a lull for so long because it was like in like the, you know.
But Jon Stewart, I mean, he wasn't political for I think for most of the Daily, you know, the Daily Show was like half just really, it seems to me, was, you know, started more about the media than it was, you know, being political per se. And that was about it. I mean, yes, Geraldo, but I mean, I'll tell you something. I went to the show you did at Union Hall, and when I was in comedy from the early '90s to the mid aughts or so, I went to, I don't know, 1,000 rooms like that, and there was more talk about political issues in that night than I saw in any given night ever before, and it. I mean, partly because you do politics, but even just like the other comedians too. And I know that's somewhat self-selected, but people just did not 100%. Do. Barry Crimmins was one of the few people who was doing political. And I was in San Francisco and I was in Boston. I mean, these are not non-political places.
Yeah, well, definitely. I do think that there was like a lull of political comedy in the 90s. I mean, Janine was doing it, but I also think like right now it's kind of like the same thing where it's like if a glass of water if you hear a glass shatter in a room, you have to acknowledge it. We're just in this moment where you can't ignore it. So even comedians, I've been doing political comedy for a while. I started out that way. But I think a lot of comedians are talking about it and we're exhausted. I'm trying not to talk about it. But again, it's the elephant in the room or that glass shattering. It's hard to escape it or to not acknowledge it, especially when it's been so personal the past 2 years. We're literally all trapped in our homes because of a global pandemic and a botched response to it. And that had to do with politics. And I also 100% self-select the comedians that I put on the show.
Right. There was one joke that you did the other night that I wanted to because I've contemplated and it was about the, you know, because you mentioned in the context of you know, comedy, and there's been, you know, sort of at least some measure of accountability for, you know, showbiz more than maybe other places in terms of like Me Too and within the context of comedy. But you talked about the sort of dynamic of being able to separate the artist from the art. Yeah, talk about that. I don't want
That's
to give
a
away
bit-
your joke, but
Well, it's actually a bit that it doesn't really land, and it's just not, it's like I'm starting with it. That whole question of like how to separate the art from the artist, it's really interesting that that's like what we're focusing on instead of like asteroid defense. Like we're all obsessed as a society as to like whether or not you can listen to Michael Jackson, or like, I'm still a fan of Annie Hall, and I hate that I am. It's my favorite movie, but my take is very tepid. I don't have answers. But I do think that there is like an outsized attention to comedians and to culture in a way where like we ignore other things because like we're all interested in, celebrity and what have you. And so, I don't fully have that joke yet. I don't even remember what I said exactly that night.
well, you said something to the effect. Can I remind you?
Please.
You
Yeah.
said something to the effect of like, it's so hard for me to separate the books from the accountant. And,
Okay. Yeah. How we're not looking. I mean, it's more like musicians. I probably forgot that part, but just the fact that like you can't even meet two musicians because we wouldn't even know where to start. You know what I mean? They all fucked teens back in the day. It was the 70s. And then how we're not looking as much at I said, how do you separate the accountants from the books they keep? That's what it was. It's like, we're not thinking about that. We're just thinking really in art. That I think was like what I was trying to get at, but that's a hard bit because it feels more like a TED Talk than it does jokes, and it's hard to open with. But I'm glad
TED Talks are very popular.
Yeah.
Jena Friedman, where can people get more information about your upcoming show?
I probably Twitter or maybe Instagram. That's what I post on, and I'm doing more. I'm taping an hour in like possibly June, and so I'll be running it a bunch. I have like 4 shows at Union Hall in March, and I'm just going to be kind of testing out new jokes and working it out.
Where are you taping the show?
I don't know yet. It's
Who's it for? Can you say?
I don't know if I can say, but it's for one of the streamers, not Netflix.
One of the non-Netflix streamers.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll put a link to your Instagram and to your Twitter feed at majority.fm. Thanks so much for coming on, Jena.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you.